Ever been swimming in your own pond, sun on your face, just soaking in peace, when out of nowhere a siren wails and a voice yells, "Step out of the water"? Yeah, that happened to me. There I was floating like it was a spa day, when Karen shows up at the edge of my land, dragging her cop husband along like some kind of reality show enforcer. He points at me and says, "You're trespassing on my own property." What neither of them knew. I'm the police chief of this entire county. And the guy barking orders? I gave him his badge. So before you ask, wait, what happened next? Let me rewind this bizarre day from the splash to the takedown. I was deep in the cool, reflecting waters of my private pond, a little oasis tucked behind my sprawling property, when I first noticed the commotion. In that moment of rare solitude, I felt completely at ease with nature and the simple pleasures of life. But suddenly, the calm was shattered by the blare of a siren echoing across the quiet country road. At first, I could barely believe my eyes as I watched a pair of figures storm up the bank. One was the perpetually fussy Karen, clipboard clutched tightly against her chest, and the other, her cop husband, whose uniform shimmered under the rising sun as he barked commands like a drill sergeant. I nearly sank beneath the water in shock. Here they were, intruding on my property, accusing me of trespassing on my very own land, a land I've nurtured and protected for years. In my world, these acres weren't just dirt and trees. They were a legacy, a testament to hard work, and a sanctuary where I maintained balance between duty and the freedom of rural life. And now, out of nowhere, they were trying to enforce their petty rules upon it. It turned out that Karen had gotten wind of some minor regulation changes in our homeowners association and, in her ever-watchful manner, decided I wasn't compliant enough with the new community standards. Instead of taking my side or even quietly questioning the complaint, she mobilized her husband, an officer I respected in his uniform, until he stepped into the role of enforcer on her behalf. With accusations thrown around and voices raised in misplaced authority, it all became comically absurd. When that cop husband pointed accusingly at me, I could see his eyes widen as my expression grew steely with recognition, because in that moment, I silently resolved to set things straight. I had always known that true authority comes from standing by the law and protecting one's community, but today I was about to teach them a lesson. And so, the stage was set for a day that would flip their world upside down. What they failed to realize was that every rule they tried to enforce, every petty complaint they lobbed, only strengthened my resolve. Little did Karen or her husband suspect that by challenging my rights as a property owner, they were challenging a man who had spent years enforcing the law and upholding justice. And when duty calls, sometimes the tables must be turned. Welcome to Clearwater Acres, a rural haven where wide-open spaces and rolling hills define the landscape. My property, a sprawling 150-acre estate, is not just a plot of land. It's a legacy passed down through generations. Here, the gentle murmur of the nearby creek and the rustle of the wind through the trees set the rhythm of life, far removed from the hustle of city streets. My private pond, nestled among mature oak trees, is a place of retreat and reflection, a natural sanctuary that I have personally cultivated and protected. I've always taken great pride in living self-reliantly, striking a balance between the responsibilities of a landowner and the call to serve my community. As the police chief of our county, my days are filled with enforcing the law and ensuring public safety. But outside of work, my property is my kingdom, a farm stand bursting with fresh produce, a pond where I find solitude, and a myriad of outbuildings that tell the story of a life connected to nature. In stark contrast to the freedom of my acres lies Clearwater Estates, an impeccably manicured homeowners association-dominated neighborhood on the edge of our county. Here, every house conforms to a strict aesthetic, and every lawn is maintained with near-military precision. Rules are the law, and any deviation is met with swift retribution. At the center of enforcing these rules is Karen Miller, affectionately and infamously known as HOA Karen. Clad in tailored outfits with an ever-present clipboard and smartphone, She patrols Clearwater Estates like an official arbiter of perfection, ready to pounce on the slightest infraction. Karen's obsession with uniformity and control is well known. To her, every element of the community must align with her vision of order, a vision that leaves no room for individual expression. If your lawn isn't the exact shade of green she deems acceptable, if your property deviates even slightly from the prescribed norm, you're in trouble. This rigid approach has earned her a mix of admiration from some residents and deep resentment from others. My relationship with Karen, however, has always been fraught with tension. While I respect the need for community standards, I have long believed that true freedom lies in the ability to manage one's own property without arbitrary interference. My work as a law enforcement officer has taught me to uphold the law and protect our citizens. Yet at the same time, I've always championed individual rights and the freedom to live life on one's own terms. My property is a testament to that philosophy, filled with creative touches and unexpected surprises, like my farm stand, which showcases everything from heirloom tomatoes to homemade preserves crafted with love and care. It wasn't until recently that Karen's fixation with enforcing the rules turned personal. In a move that none of us saw coming, she decided to send her cop husband, a man I once respected in his uniform, to my property with orders to kick me off my own land. Her actions were fueled by a petty complaint that I had inadvertently violated a minor regulation, though I had always operated well within my rights. The idea that someone could disregard my long-held legacy simply to assert some arbitrary rule was infuriating, and it set the stage for a showdown that would not only redefine my relationship with the HOA, but also remind everyone in Clearwater Estates who truly wore the badge of authority. My property, with its rustic charm and undeniable independence, had always been a safe haven for creativity. Whether it was a spontaneous gathering at my farm stand or a quiet afternoon by the pond, my land was a sanctuary, a place where the rules of conformity were meant to be gently nudged aside by the sheer force of personal expression. And today, as I prepared to respond to Karen's latest intrusion, I knew I was not only defending my property rights, but also standing up for the broader principles of freedom and justice in our community. The confrontation began one clear morning when Karen and her cop husband, full of self-righteous indignation, arrived at the edge of my property. I had been out checking on my crops when I saw them stepping off a patrol car, their expressions set in stone. The cop, dressed in a crisp uniform and radiating authority, pointed accusingly at me as if I had committed a heinous crime. "You're trespassing," he barked, his tone echoing off the fields as if it were a command for the masses. I stood there, stunned for a moment, my mind racing as I processed the absurdity of the situation. How could they claim I was trespassing on my own land? Karen, eyes narrowed and voice trembling with righteous fury, declared that I was violating community regulations by using my property in a way that was incompatible with the standards of Clearwater Estates. She insisted that my casual enjoyment of my land, my farm stand, and even my quiet moments by the pond were interfering with the communal order that she so zealously upheld. I quickly reached for my radio, my tone calm, yet laced with authority. "Sir, I believe there's been a misunderstanding," I said, my voice steady. But the cop's response was rigid, his eyes not showing any hint of reconsideration. Karen interjected, "He's been warned before. He has no right to use his land the way he pleases." I could see the determination in her eyes. This was more than just enforcing a rule. It was a personal vendetta. In the days that followed, tension escalated rapidly. I gathered evidence from my property's security cameras, which clearly showed Karen's husband arriving under Karen's orders. The footage captured the entire spectacle, from their arrival to the verbal exchange, and every moment of my silent, controlled defiance. I compiled these clips, along with detailed logs of my property boundaries and legal documents affirming my ownership, into a digital dossier that I intended to use as leverage. Meanwhile, rumors began to spread throughout Clearwater Estates. Neighbors, long frustrated by the HOA's heavy-handed rule enforcement, started to talk. Comments on community forums ranged from disbelief to outright support for my stance. One neighbor posted, I've known him all my life. He owns his land, and no one has the right to kick him off." Another remarked, "Karen's been out of control lately. It's high time someone stood up to her." The collective sentiment was clear. While some had always quietly resented Karen's overzealous policing, this was the moment they would no longer remain silent. Determined to reclaim my rights and set an example for the entire community, I began planning a response that would be as unequivocal as it was creative. I decided that instead of merely contesting the baseless accusations, I would take control of the narrative by demonstrating the full extent of my authority. After all, I wasn't just any homeowner. I was the police chief, a man tasked with upholding the law across the entire county. I knew that, in the eyes of the community, my integrity and my commitment to fairness would speak louder than Karen's petty grievances ever could. I reached out to a few trusted neighbors and legal advisors to discuss my options. Their advice was unanimous. The rules of property ownership were clear, and my rights were unequivocal. Bolstered by their support, I prepared a formal complaint to submit to the HOA board, detailing every moment of the intrusion, accompanied by the security footage and legal documentation. I made it clear that if the board failed to act against this blatant abuse of power, I would not hesitate to invoke my rights through every legal channel available. Karen's reaction to my actions was predictable. She redoubled her efforts to enforce what she believed was order. But every time she made an attempt to intimidate me, my evidence and steadfast demeanor only grew stronger. The conflict had become not just a personal matter, but a battleground for property rights and the freedom to live and work without arbitrary interference. Days turned into a tense standoff as the HOA board convened to deliberate on the issue. Meanwhile, I continued to update the community online with my digital dossier, sharing snippets of security footage and legal briefs that confirmed the obvious. I was indeed the rightful owner of every inch of my land, and no one had the authority to kick me off my property. The online support grew exponentially, with hashtags like #MyLandMyRules and #ChiefForReal trending among residents who had grown weary of the HOA's oppressive rule enforcement. The stage was set for a dramatic showdown. My battle against Karen's petty vendetta had morphed into a larger fight for justice, one that pitted individual rights against institutional overreach. And as I watched the community rally behind me, I knew that this conflict was no longer just about a mistaken trespass. It was a declaration that true authority comes from respect for the law, not from enforcing arbitrary rules. In the wake of the confrontation, the digital storm quickly gathered momentum throughout Clearwater Estates. Videos of the contentious encounter between me and Karen's husband, along with eyewitness accounts from concerned neighbors, flooded social media. Hashtags like #MyLandMyRules, #ChiefForReal, and #NoMoreKaren began trending, and the narrative started shifting from a simple boundary dispute to a broader crusade against arbitrary HOA power. Local news outlets were among the first to pick up on the story. Reporters arrived at my property in droves, capturing live footage of the area and interviewing residents who expressed a mix of outrage and support. "It's a stunning contradiction," one reporter noted on air. "One minute you see an officer enforcing the law, and the next he's the one defending his own rights against a misguided enforcer from the HOA." The contrasting images of a decorated badge and a pair of angry protesters underscored the spectacle, a drama unfolding right in our own neighborhood. Within the HOA board, cracks began to show. Emergency meetings were convened behind closed doors as board members attempted to navigate the growing controversy. Leaked minutes from these meetings painted a picture of division. Longtime supporters of Karen found themselves increasingly at odds with newer voices insisting on fairness and accountability. "We cannot continue to allow personal vendettas to dictate community policy," one board member was quoted as saying in an off-the-record conversation. The evidence against Karen was mounting, and the digital dossier I had compiled was being shared widely, not just among residents, but also by local legal experts who weighed in on the obvious infringement on my property rights. As the pressure mounted, neighbors began sharing their own stories of past grievances, of fines levied for minor infractions, of unauthorized inspections, and of instances where creative expression had been stifled by the relentless enforcement of outdated rules. Online petitions demanding a thorough review of the HOA's policies grew in both numbers and fervor. Every post, every video clip, every supportive comment was a testament to the collective frustration simmering just below the surface. The public sentiment was clear. The community no longer tolerated arbitrary interference, and Karen's reputation as the unassailable enforcer was crumbling. Determined to transform this personal battle into a catalyst for lasting change, I intensified my efforts. I held a series of neighborhood meetings at my property, inviting residents to share their own experiences and discuss the need for reform. Together, we organized a digital campaign to demand that the HOA board not only review my case, but also implement new guidelines to protect all property owners from similar overreach. My updates, filled with raw footage of our meetings and screenshots of online support, quickly became the go-to source for news on the controversy. Comments flooded in. Finally, someone standing up for us, and our community will no longer live in fear of arbitrary fines. Meanwhile, Karen was scrambling to salvage her authority. In a series of frantic social media posts, she claimed that her actions were meant to protect community aesthetics and that her intentions were misunderstood. But every claim was swiftly countered by the overwhelming digital evidence. Time-stamped security footage of her husband's aggressive approach, logs that clearly outlined the events of that fateful day, and legal documentation affirming my property rights. The narrative was flipping. What was once painted as a heroic enforcement of rules was now revealed as a petty, self-serving act by someone out of touch with the realities of modern property ownership. Local authorities, having observed the increasing tension, issued a statement affirming that as a state trooper and police chief, I was fully within my rights to defend my property. Their statement added a layer of official credibility to my claims, further isolating Karen's overblown narrative from the community's growing demand for justice. As the final public hearing loomed, the digital dossier served as an unassailable archive of every moment of this ongoing struggle. Neighbors organized protests, distributed flyers, and even set up information booths near the community center to ensure that every resident was informed of what had transpired and why it mattered. Every shared video and every hashtag was a clarion call for reform. On the eve of the hearing, the air in Clearwater Estates was charged with anticipation. I spent a quiet moment reflecting on everything that had led to this point. The repeated fines, the baseless accusations, and now, the overwhelming demand for accountability. The stage was set for a decisive confrontation that would force the HOA board to choose between upholding oppressive, outdated rules and embracing a future where property rights and individual freedom were respected above all. The decisive moment arrived on a chilly morning as I walked into the packed boardroom at the Clearwater Estates Community Center. The room brimmed with HOA officials, local law enforcement representatives, community leaders, and hundreds of determined residents, all gathered for the final public hearing that would decide the fate of our community's enforcement policies. With a calm, yet commanding presence, I took my seat, knowing that in just a few minutes the entire trajectory of this confrontation would be laid bare. Councilwoman Denise Rivera was the first to speak. With a firm tone that carried the weight of our collective voice, she began, after an exhaustive review of all digital evidence, including time-stamped security footage, detailed records of property usage, and numerous eyewitness testimonies. We have reached a definitive conclusion. It is abundantly clear that the actions taken by Mrs. Karen Miller, specifically her decision to send her cop husband to evict a rightful property owner, were not motivated by any legitimate concern for community standards, but were driven purely by personal bias and a gross abuse of power. A heavy silence fell over the room as she continued. Effective immediately, the HOA board will rescind all sanctions and fines imposed as a result of this incident. Furthermore, we will launch a full disciplinary review of the policies and practices that allowed such an overreach to occur. Our community stands for truth, individual rights, and the freedom to live without undue interference. Today's decision is not simply about one wrongful eviction attempt. It is a resounding declaration that our rights as property owners will not be trampled by personal vendettas. Her words resonated deeply. Murmurs of agreement spread throughout the assembly. At that moment, a veteran community advocate, long known for his steadfast commitment to justice, rose to speak. "Today, we stand united as one," he declared, his voice echoing throughout the room. "No resident should ever have their right to live and work on their own property compromised by arbitrary enforcement. Let this final vote be the turning point, a clear signal that our community values fairness and innovation over petty rule enforcement. We demand accountability, and we will ensure that every instance of abuse is met with swift, decisive action." The applause that followed was thunderous, a collective roar of approval that underscored the deep sense of unity in the room. Following this, a senior officer from our county's oversight office presented the final dossier, a meticulously compiled record of every piece of digital evidence, expert analyses confirming my property's legal status, and detailed logs that debunked every claim made by Karen Miller. The evidence was irrefutable. Not only was I legally protected, but the attempt to evict me was nothing more than abuse of power fueled by personal bias. The Internal Affairs panel had unanimously recommended strict disciplinary measures, and the full report was scheduled for immediate public release. Councilwoman Rivera then concluded, "Let this resolution mark the dawn of a new era for Clearwater Estates, a community where every resident's rights are respected, where public authority is exercised with integrity, and where creativity and individuality are cherished. Our vote today is a resounding declaration that we will protect our freedoms, and no one, no matter how self-righteous, can impose their will on our community without accountability. Together, we stand for justice, transparency, and the inalienable right to live free." Her final words, delivered with unwavering conviction, sealed the turning point in our battle for property rights and individual freedom. In that defining moment, as every face in the boardroom shone with determination and hope, the balance of power shifted irrevocably. The overwhelming digital evidence and the unified voice of our community forced the HOA board to take decisive action, a turning point that would forever reshape the governance of Clearwater Estates. The days of arbitrary enforcement were over, and a future built on respect for individual rights was finally within our grasp. In the weeks following the decisive vote, Clearwater Estates underwent a profound transformation. News of the rescinded sanctions and sweeping reforms implemented by the HOA board spread rapidly throughout local media and online platforms, sparking fervent debates about property rights, individual freedom, and the proper role of community governance. Editorials in the local newspaper, with headlines such as "A New Dawn for Clearwater Estates" and "Community United for Freedom," celebrated the bold step toward protecting homeowners' rights. Hashtags like #PropertyRights, #NoMoreHOBullying, and #LiveFree trended widely, underscoring the community's collective determination to stand against arbitrary overreach. Town hall meetings and community forums saw unprecedented attendance as residents gathered to share their personal experiences and to envision a future free from the oppressive control of outdated rules. Neighbors, who once lived in constant fear of punitive fines and secret inspections, now spoke openly about their right to manage their property and express their creativity. "Our homes and our land are our own, and nothing should ever dictate how we live," one impassioned speaker declared at a crowded meeting, his voice echoing through the packed hall. The atmosphere was charged with hope, a promise that Clearwater Estates would forever honor the spirit of individuality and freedom. Within the reformed HOA board and local public safety departments, swift policy changes were implemented. Senior officials, led by Director James Carter and Lieutenant Marcus Reed, launched comprehensive training programs focused on ethical conduct, cultural sensitivity, and transparent management of community affairs. Regular internal audits and clear disciplinary protocols were instituted, ensuring that every resident's right would be safeguarded and that no one would suffer from arbitrary rule enforcement again. Our duty is to protect the rights and dignity of every member of our community, Lieutenant Reed declared at a follow-up press conference, reinforcing the renewed commitment to justice. Community leaders and local civil rights organizations mobilized further by organizing workshops, public forums, and educational campaigns that empowered residents and fostered a culture of mutual respect. When we unite, our voices are a powerful force that can reshape even the most entrenched systems, a local activist proclaimed during a town hall meeting, inspiring residents to stand together in the fight for a fair and inclusive community. For me, the journey from confrontation to resolution was deeply personal and transformative. My decision to stand up against HOA Karen and her absurd attempt to control my property by buying the grocery store she so adored was not just an act of defiance. It was a declaration that every individual has the right to live and work on their own terms. The digital evidence that once chronicled every intrusion and every petty fine became a beacon of hope for those who had long suffered in silence. Neighbors, emboldened by our shared victory, recounted their own tales of resistance and celebrated the freedom to innovate without fear. Karen Miller, once a formidable figure of HOA tyranny, was reduced to a cautionary tale. Digital records of her previous transgressions circulated widely, and her influence within Clearwater Estates dwindled as residents embraced a future where individuality was celebrated and protected. Her era of unchecked authority had come to an end. At a final celebratory gathering held in the Central Park of Clearwater Estates, residents, officials, and community advocates came together under the golden glow of the setting sun. A massive banner declaring unity, freedom, and property rights was unfurled between towering oaks, and heartfelt speeches rang out with promises of a brighter, more inclusive future. Today, we celebrate our victory, a victory for every homeowner's right to live as they choose, Councilwoman Rivera declared, her voice firm and inspiring. The thunderous applause that followed was not just for me, but for the entire community's reclaiming of its freedoms. As each new day dawned over Clearwater Estates, the legacy of that fateful confrontation endured as a guiding light, a testament to the power of community unity and the importance of standing up for one's rights. The story of how HOA Karen sent her cop husband to kick me off my own land, only for the tables to be dramatically turned when they discovered I was the police chief, became a rallying cry for every resident who believed in justice and freedom. Every sunrise now carried with it the promise that in Clearwater Estates, truth, justice, and individual rights would forever prevail. In the end, what began as a personal battle evolved into a watershed moment for our entire community. We emerged more united, more vigilant, and more determined than ever to protect our rights against any form of bureaucratic overreach. And as the sun rose each morning over our reclaimed neighborhood, it carried the promise that Clearwater Estates would forever be a place where creativity, integrity, and respect for individual freedom shone as brightly as the morning light.